Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're here to welcome the publication of The Second Arab Awakening and the Battle for Pluralism by Marwan Muhashar. And we welcome Marwan again to Politics and Prose. He's a regular here as an author. Just keep writing the books, you keep coming. And this is a special occasion today. As an old organizer, I love it that there's standing room only. That's a great sign. And this is a wonderful book that I heartily recommend because I've read it. And, we're all caught up with Syria and Egypt and Israel and Palestine. And what has happened here with Marwan Muhashar's book is a timely, relevant, historically grounded book that is by a person who not only can analyze but has really been engaged in the whole process of governing and public life. The flyleaf, of course, says that he was ambassador to the U.S. I happen to have been in the Capitol the day the acknowledgement of the treaty between Israel and Jordan occurred. And Marwan became the first ambassador to Israel and stood with Yitzhak Rabin on that tragic night when Rabin was assassinated. So I think you get a sense of the commitment of Marwan Muhashar and what he is about. He is very much a compensated mind person, and what I mean by that is he begins to answer the kinds of questions in this book that deal with Islamophobia, which is excessive and has no place, and points out why Islam is not monolithic. And at the same time, he tells us why the secularists are not always the children of light. His is a focus on pluralism that recognizes the importance of diversity and the no monopoly of power. And it reflects what this story, having him here today at this time, reflects what Politics and Prose is about under the ownership of Brad Graham and Lissa Muscatine, of being able to have serious books discussed at a serious time in a way that helps inform our public discourse. So let us welcome Marwan Muhashar to Politics and Prose again.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure to be here at Politics and Prose, not just to speak, but also to buy books. It's a great place. The message of this book is a real simple one. In fact, it is so simple that it should be self-evident. I mean, to say that we need pluralism does not seem to be, such a profound statement. And yet it is not self-evident. What we have seen in the Arab world so far does not yet suggest that the battle of pluralism, has gone far, if you want. I call the book The Second Arab Awakening because I compare it with the first, which was an intellectual movement that started in the mid-19th century among intellectuals from the Levant, Lebanon, Syria, from Egypt, from Tunisia, the same places that are undergoing transitions today. These people were then talking about the need to get rid of Ottoman rule and then later on of colonial rule. And in fact, this intellectual movement made its way later on to popular movements around the Arab world that called for independence. But that movement stopped there. Once independence was achieved in the Arab world, no force that governed the region, whether it was progressive or reactionary, whether it was a republic or a monarchy. No force in the Arab world worked to put in place institutional mechanisms to ensure a democratic culture, to ensure pluralistic systems. And as a result, we see today what is going on in the region. This, I hope, is going to talk about the continuation of the first Arab awakening. Not to stop at despotic rule, at ending despotic rule, but also to work for pluralistic societies. And as such, I dedicated the book to the youth of the Arab world, who I said revolted not against their parents, but on their behalf. The second Arab awakening actually started, in the opposite way of the first, started as a popular movement or popular movements around the area that have not yet been contextualized within any intellectual framework. We know very well what people are against when they went and revolted in 2011. But we're really not sure what they are for yet. We don't know whether this is a call for pluralism, for democracy, or just a call to end despotic rule. And I maintain that for the second Arab awakening to be successful, it has to be a call for pluralism as well. My departure point is that the status quo in the Arab world was not sustainable. In other words, the stability that the Arab world enjoyed was not natural stability. It was stability brought about literally by brute force, by Arab governments who basically kept the lid on people's aspirations for democracy and good governance. And when that lid was lifted, we are witnessing today all the problems and challenges that have come from beneath the surface. But no one should expect that a transformational process such as this one can take place smoothly, quickly, in a short 3 years. It has not done so anywhere else in the world. There is no place in the world that has witnessed transitions that did it in a short 3 years. Why should the Arab world be different escapes me. And so just as this movement was naively called an Arab Spring 3 years ago, because people somehow romantically expected autocracies to just, evolve into democracies overnight, it is equally naive, in my view, to call it today an Arab winter, an Arab inferno, or to expect that the Arab world is going to the dark ages as a result of these uprisings. This is a process that is going to take decades. And it is a process where some countries will succeed, some countries will struggle, and yet others will fail, just as has been the case anywhere else around the world as well. But so far, even in 3 short years, I think there have been very important developments that get lost when people read about Syria, when people read about Egypt, when people see the turmoil that is happening in the Arab world. We tend to forget that as these negative developments take place, there are other developments that are making their way slowly but surely in the Arab world that actually, in my view, are very positive, and I talk about them. The first development is the evolution of political Islam. Political Islam, which has been artificially kept outside the system by Arab governments for decades, and as a result was actually strengthened by these governments, not by their performance, because they couldn't perform, they were outside the system. What they could do is promise people good governance and slogans such as Islam is the solution. In 3 short years, once they came to power, in 3 short years, in places like in Egypt or Tunisia or elsewhere, political Islam has demonstrated that it is no better or worse than other political forces in the Arab world. And that once in governance, it really does not have magic answers to the challenges that confront the Arab world. And so, in a place like Egypt, unfortunately mitigated by the military intervention, the same street that brought the Islamists to power was the street that basically asked them to leave in millions of people, proving a very important point which the book also makes based on polls, that whereas the Arab street in a place like Egypt is conservative and religious, it does not want its government to dictate to it how to be conservative or religious. It wants its government to worry about the economy, period. 70% of Egyptians want the government to worry about the economy. 2% want their government to worry about ideology. And that is becoming a very important message that is being so far, I think, lost. That performance is trumping ideology in the Arab world today. And that applies to secular and religious forces alike. Both are losing their holiness. Islam is the solution is no longer a popular slogan in the Arab world if it is not translated into practical programs. Just as the secular regimes of, Mubarak and Assad and others have also lost the Arab street because they did not deliver. The Islamists today are also losing the Arab street because they are equally not delivering. Unfortunately, the secular forces are not behaving much wiser in a place like Egypt, at least, if not in more. The secular forces who have accused the Islamists of being exclusionist and of trying to dominate the political scene once they come to power are actually doing exactly that once they are in power. And so far, at least in Egypt, it has been a zero-sum game where the winner takes all. And the book makes the point that as long as this is a zero-sum game, the sum will be zero. And if this becomes a battle between secular elements and religious ones, whoever wins that battle becomes the new dictator of the Arab world. Rather, I argue for a battle for pluralism, in which all forces, secular and religious, work not only for their right to operate politically, but for others' rights to do that as well. Because once you exclude others, you are giving them the chance to exclude you as well. The second very important development, in my view, is what is going on in Tunisia today. No one hardly is talking about it here. No one. Everybody is concerned with Egypt. Everybody is concerned with Syria. But what is happening in Tunisia is extremely important. As we speak, the Tunisians, as we speak, are voting on a new constitution that has been arrived at through a consensus process by all forces in society, secular and religious as well. That is the most forward-looking constitution in the Arab world ever, if not in other parts of the world as well. Imagine that this constitution upholds the right of belief or of no belief and accepted by the Islamic force in society. Upholds total parity between men and women. Upholds the right, peaceful rotation of power at all times. I mean, the list goes on. The important thing is that it is a process that has not been easy, but in the end that has been reached through consensus, through agreement by all the political forces in the country. And today, if the elections are held tomorrow morning in Tunisia, Al-Nahda, the largest Islamic force, will actually lose to a secular coalition or to a coalition of secular parties. And if that happens, I understand it's still an if, but if that happens, it will be the first time in the Arab world, probably in the Islamic world, no, not in the Islamic world, where an Islamist force will come to power and then abandon it through the ballot box. And that is going to send huge repercussions to the rest of the Arab world, particularly to countries that have not yet undergone transitions and are still portraying themselves to their populations as the lesser of two evils. You know, claiming that if they open up their systems, then the Islamists will come and all hell will break loose. Let us remember Morocco also. Morocco today is governed by a coalition government headed by an Islamist. The sky did not fall in Morocco. And in fact, Morocco is doing a lot of reforms that are going well. So my point is, let's not get too hung up on, secular or religious forces governing. What we need to put in place are institutions, economic and political, that would ensure a prosperous and stable Arab world in the future. I want to make one point about national identities. In the Maghreb, in the western part of the Arab world, in the North African part of the Arab world, these are societies in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Morocco, that have thought of themselves for a very long time as Egyptians, as Tunisians, long before their modern nation state was created. They're more or less homogeneous societies. And that is why I think that even though they will go through different iterations of trying to dominate the scene, in the end, they will make it because their sense of a national identity is strong. Whereas in the Mashriq of the Arab world, in the eastern part, the Asian part of the Arab world, most of these countries are modern-day creations by the British and French in 1916 with the famous Sykes-Picot Agreement. And when you draw borders artificially, you put together different groups without any real sense of a national identity. And as a result, we have seen countries like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, we have seen sub-identities in these countries trump their national identity. And as a result, we see what is happening there today. Sectarian strife, horrific war in Syria, multiple civil wars in Lebanon, a war in Iraq, etc. And that is why the Arab world must give this due attention. That from now on we can no longer talk about Christians and Muslims, Sunni and Shiite, and expect, any sense of prosperity or stability to come to the region. And I maintain that the Sunni-Shiite divide is not necessarily a totally religious divide. It is a political divide. If the Shiites and Sunnis were treated equally in Saudi Arabia, we would not have a problem. If the Sunnis and Shiites were treated equally in Bahrain, we would not have a problem. It is a problem of citizenship before it is a problem of any, divide in religious ideology. I devote a whole chapter in the book to education because I firmly believe, first, that there are no shortcuts to democracy. This is not going to end well unless people roll up their sleeves and work for democracy. People who just, watch from a distance and then lament the fate of the Arab world from a distance are engaging in a self-fulfilling prophecy. If Arabs want prosperous and stable societies, they have to roll up their own sleeves and work for one. And one of the most important elements, in my view, is a new educational system. Not, revisiting education in terms of creating more schools and putting computers in them. But in terms of the value system that Arab children are taught, are they taught to think critically? Are they taught to question what they are given? Are they taught to accept other points of views? Are they taught to tolerate other points of view? Are they taught that truths tend to be relative and not absolute? None of this is being taught. And as a result, of course, everybody today is behaving in an exclusionist manner. If that is to change, then I think education is one of the areas that not many people are talking about, but that is a very important one to do. The battle for pluralism, in my view, has started, and that is why I'm optimistic. I'm not optimistic because I cannot see what is happening in the Arab world today. But at least the battle has started. We have, gained independence from colonial and foreign rule for the last 70 or 80 years. But the battle was not even allowed to start of ideas. Now that it has started, it is natural that it will go through a lot of turmoil. And it is natural that some people will lose this battle and will revert to, authoritarian regime once again. But at least the chance to develop pluralistic societies today is possible where it was not possible before. I, if you allow me, would like to just read a few paragraphs from the conclusion of the book because they summarize my personal outlook and view of what is going on. Some will read this book and regard its arguments as a naive, almost romantic view of an Arab world that does not exist, totally detached from reality. They will point out the current tumultuous state of affairs and wonder how one can ever talk about diversity and tolerance when Syria is being dismantled before our eyes. How can one dream of a democratic Arab world when countries such as Iraq and Lebanon are still organized along sectarian and not national lines? How can one even speak of an awakening when the initial calls for dignity and good governance have turned into an Islamist takeover by forces whose idea of reform is to take all steps necessary to ensure their grip on power as they slowly oblige the whole of society to practice what only they believe? Status quo forces in the Arab world will point to the past 3 years and say, "We told you so." They will argue that the turmoil that has characterized most of the transitions is evidence that their policies of imposed stability have worked better, even if the political space is limited or closed. They will dismiss arguments that much of what we witness today is in fact a direct result of their own policies of suppressing the development of societies that respect diversity in all its forms and that empower people to exercise a true sense of citizenship. I strongly believe that history is our guiding light on what is transpiring in today's Arab awakenings. I write not out of a romantic connection to the region, but rather out of a firm conviction that the battle of ideas has finally started to unfold in the contemporary Arab world. It is a battle that will only be won by those who are ready to toil and sweat to get their point of view acknowledged. Some emerging political forces, frustrated by not being able to build national organizations and political programs, may advocate undemocratic means, as they have already, to stem the tide of Islamists. They will fade. The Arab world will go through a period of turmoil in which exclusionist forces from both camps will attempt to dominate the landscape with absolute truths and new dictatorships. These forces will also fade, because in the end, exclusionist authoritarian discourses cannot answer the people's need for a better quality of life. economically, politically, culturally, and otherwise. As history has demonstrated overwhelmingly, where there is respect for diversity, there is prosperity. Experience shows that societies cannot keep renewing themselves and thereby thrive except through diversity. Neither the theological Iranian model of Wilayat al-Faqih nor the secular authoritarian model of the Mubarak regime has succeeded in solving the region's economic, political, or cultural challenges. This task is not for the faint-hearted, or those who I consider to be the true romantics, individuals who are too quick to give up if democracy does not come overnight, or if their lifestyles are not guaranteed without them rolling up their sleeves. This is how I see the true contribution of this book. My hope is that as it is read and reread through the lens of time, 20, 30, 50 years down the line, and possibly after all other alternatives to diversity have been exhausted, it might inspire some to reject the prospect of waiting that long, and to encourage them to devote their energies to creating a pluralistic Arab world, now that the chance to do so is at least made possible through the historic process just unleashed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al-Muasher. This was you showed your historian sensibility, and at the same time showed that a public official can have reflective qualities. And that is a very important combination, far too rare. I want to get the questions started. I see already we have someone at the microphone. Carol is often there first, but you're going to be second today.
Okay.
And that's because I'm going to be first. I was very struck by your closing. And of course we want, not for the faint-hearted, my mentor, John Gardner, used to say advocacy and citizen action is not for the short-winded. So it goes with the faint-hearted. But in your book, you were very, very hopeful about a new generation of young people accepting pluralism and understanding it and feeling it and wrestling with it in ways that other generations haven't. And I wonder if you can comment on that for us as a starter, and then we'll have questions from the audience.
Thank you, David. As you can see, I devoted this book to the youth of the Arab world. I have little hope that the old forces in the Arab world, both the secular and the religious ones, can reform from within. If they have not already, and particularly 3 years after the uprising, they will never do that. There's a big vacuum in the Arab world today. Vacuum created because the secular forces that ruled over the Arab world for the last 100 years, 70 years, have failed in delivering results to their people. By the same token, the Islamist forces that are now given a chance are also failing to deliver results to their people. We have a vacuum today in the Arab world. That vacuum, my hope, is that it should be filled by the youth, by the young generation. And frankly, I talk a lot with the young generation. David mentioned that I was a public official in Jordan. I'm actually, hated by the system in Jordan. And some, at least in the young generation, like what I'm saying. And it is telling. It is telling. The status quo forces do not want change. They want to keep, they want to keep their privileges. And any merit-based system is going to rob them away from their privileges, even in a gradual manner. But it is important for this new generation, which actually started the revolution in Egypt, started the revolution in Tunisia, but is not reaping its benefits yet, because more organized, established political forces have taken over. This is a generation that is leaderless. This is a generation that has not developed, clear programs. It's a generation that is not mobilized, is not politically mobilized, etc. So it is not a generation that is going to take over immediately. It will take time. But it is a generation that is exposed to the outside world. It is a generation that understands, the silliness of all the slogans that are being put forward today by both forces, expecting people to just blindly go behind them. They have done so in the past and they failed. And I still remain very hopeful from the people I talk to that we do have groups that are very active on the ground, understand that from now on they cannot just, as I'm doing today, lecture from behind podiums. They have to roll up their sleeves and work on the ground. And they do understand that this is a fight that is going to take decades, not years, decades of hard work before their point of view comes across. And I'm fine with that. There are no shortcuts to democracy. We wasted 70 or 80 years, we're paying the price for it. But if it takes 50 more years, that's fine. And I didn't tell you this, David, but I am moving back to Jordan this summer in order to do just that. I would like to work with the young generation and contribute to a process of building institutions that in the end will offer the Arab world natural stability, not artificial stability.
We will miss you, but you are, but you're taking on the important task of helping being a builder, and there is nothing more important than that. These events are recorded. Not everybody could be here, and that's why we're taping, and they're also recorded, and people can get it on their computer, and so can you. So we'll begin with the questions. Please use the microphones. Everybody seems to understand that. And since this is a public meeting, if you're comfortable, tell us your name. Carol.
My name is Caroline Poplin. I'm a physician. The first person always gets to ask the most obvious question, which is the autocratic right / military is well organized, and the Islamic Jihad is left, or the Muslim Brotherhood is well organized, and the people in the middle are not well organized. What's the role for the United States in all this? In Egypt, we were damned if we did, and we were damned if we didn't. If we supported the military government, that was bad. If we supported the people in the streets, that brought about the Muslim Brotherhood. And if we supported the Muslim Brotherhood, that wasn't good either. And in Syria, the middle is barely organized and is being crunched from both sides, and 110,000 people are dead. What should the U.S. be doing to help the middle and the young people, and to bring about a stable, diverse, a decent political system where people aren't getting killed?
The short answer is just do no harm.
Fair enough.
Because in a historical sense, I think the international community's role, sure, needs to be helpful, but it's going to be marginal. Whatever you do, not just the U.S., but the international community in general. Look at the U.S., political, economic, and military power. The military power has been shown to have severe limits after the war on Iraq, right, and Afghanistan. 10 years after the war,
things are worse than ever.
Things are worse. Economically, you've gone through a major global financial crisis. I remember Hillary Clinton going to Egypt right after the revolutions and promising the Egyptians an additional $150 million in a country that today needs at least 30 billion. And your political clout in the region has really declined and has been on the decline for quite some time because of your inability or unwillingness to help resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. The truth is today, less people are looking to the United States for answers in the region. And maybe that should be the case. I think this is a struggle that only people from the region can help resolve. And it is not going to be, we're not going to see the kind of intervention that the United States had in the past. That era is over. This president anyway does not want, heavy intervention in the region. Other than a deal with Iran, I don't think the president is particularly interested in the, in a practical sense, in the reform process or even in the Arab-Israeli conflict. But that is fine. This is a struggle that we have to figure out on our own.
We'll rotate the microphones.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the past, the United States has been as much the problem as anything else. So a lot of people wouldn't trust the United States. They'd question what their motives are. Can't hear now?
Mm.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot and ask you about Jordan.
I'm not already?
Well, for today. Tell us how you conceive of real change. You've had the royal family. It's had a close connection with the United States. It's looked like a liberal, king and all of that stuff. So how do you think that should be removed and something really different put in place? And how do you deal with the economic and political they're not going to want to do it, period. How are you going to deal with that?
I'm glad you brought up the issue of Jordan because it represents a country, in my view, my own country, of course, that has the potential to lead this reform process in the Arab world and yet is not doing anything or almost anything about it. Why does it have the potential? Because the monarchy in Jordan is actually a needed institution. If you talk to Jordanians, hardly any Jordanian wants the monarchy to, be overthrown. Why? Because the two ethnic groups in Jordan, the East Jordanians and the Palestinians, want the monarchy, if I want to put it in very crude terms, to protect it from each other. The East Jordanians want the monarchy to protect them from establishing a Palestinian state in Jordan. The Palestinians want the monarchy to protect them from what they see are the excesses of the East Jordanians. Having said that, you talk to most Jordanians and they want the system to reform from within. Okay, they don't want an absolute monarchy and absolute reform. They do want serious changes to the way the system is conducting itself. And what do I mean by serious changes? Exactly what you have implicitly referred to. Politically, serious change means power sharing. Serious change means the executive cannot remain the dominant force in society. You have to build a system of checks and balances through a strong judiciary and a strong legislative branch to address the issues that most Jordanians feel very strongly about. For example, corruption is among the top of them. Economically, you need a system to move away from the rentier economy that the Arab world has been plagued with. Oil, in my view, has been as much a curse in the Arab world as a blessing. Because oil has meant that if money is literally growing on the ground, people don't need to be productive. There's no need to productivity as a value is not important. And, in the Gulf, for example, we've perfected the notion of no taxation, no representation. We don't tax you, don't hold us accountable. That's the rentier system of the Arab world. That's the rentier system in Jordan. We are living in Jordan way beyond our means because of the largesse of, grant money from Arab countries and from the US as well, to the point that the system, as in many other places in the Arab world, has created what I call a rentier layer around it. A layer that gets privileges from the system in return for loyalty.
How will you deal with that?
And how you deal with that, you see, the government has exhausted that possibility. It used to be the case that the government would, employ people to buy basically their loyalty without any attention to their productivity, and rely on the Gulf states or America to foot the bill, the deficit bill. Today, the deficit bill in Jordan, the budget deficit in Jordan today, has a deficit of $3 billion. There's no country in the world that is going to foot that bill. Not the Americans, not the Saudis, no one. And there is no room anymore in the government for, to absorb more people. And so the system will have to, over time, of course, you cannot do it immediately, change the model from one that is totally dependent on loyalty to one that is merit-based, because that increases productivity. And as you increase productivity, as you know, you create more jobs, etc., while taking, of course, care of the less privileged in society. You cannot just ignore them. You have to take care of them. And I claim that, I was engaged in an effort where we showed how that would be possible, to move away from a rentier economy to a productive economy over 10 years in Jordan. But that is going to require not just, the ability of technocrats and economists and good financial managers. It's going to require a political will to adjust the constituency, if you want, the traditional constituency of the system, and that political will so far has been lacking. And finally, in my view, in Jordan, three elements are always on my mind. Politically, power sharing, economically moving away from the rentier system, and societally treating all Jordanians as equal regardless of their ethnic, religious, gender differences. If you don't do that, not just in Jordan, but anywhere else in the world, how can a country of 6.5 million people hope to be prosperous if it treats, its citizens in an unequal manner, if you want? Is that impossible? It is not. We've done it in the country. We've at least shown how to do it. What is lacking so far is the political will.
So before we turn to you, Victor, I just want to, there's a wonderful chapter in this book that Marwan Al-Muasher has written called Assessing What Has Changed. And there's a subpart of it that deals with Jordan. Jordan, the squandered chance. So you begin to see the depth and open-mindedness that you have addressed in this book. Victor?
Yeah. I would like to know more about the Assad regime. The impression one has is of a very powerful dictator, but I'm not sure who his constituency is. I presume it comes from the local population, but their power seems to be so overwhelming. I cry for Syria. It seems to be a disaster of incredible proportions. But other than knowing that Al-Qaeda and others are in the opposition, I don't really know the finer details of what the Assad regime is trying to do, other than stay in power, of course.
Well, trying to stay in power is, to it, a very important objective. I mean, it is, look, it is sad that a person can agree to stay or can work or fight to stay in power when more than 100,000, 130,000 of his citizens have been killed. It is sad when power becomes so delusional. The Assad regime, the Ba'athist regime in Syria, has ruled Syria with an iron hand for the last 50 years. And even though the Syrians are a very entrepreneurial society, you know, the lid that I talked about over their creativity and innovation has been a very brutal one, even before the uprisings. When the uprising started in March 2011, a lot of people tend to forget that for the first few months, they were totally peaceful, totally. Even while the Assad regime was, you know, killing the protesters were totally peaceful. Al-Qaeda and such types came into Syria only months after. Of course, making use of the vacuum that any situation like this offers. I mean, they came to Iraq making use of that vacuum also. They came to Syria. But I do not buy the argument that the fate of Syria is going to be necessarily determined by Al-Qaeda. In Iraq, they were strong for a few years. It was actually the Iraqis themselves who rose against Al-Qaeda in 2007. They're doing exactly the same as we speak today. Today, it is not the Assad regime who is fighting the Al-Qaeda types in Syria. Actually, it is the moderate elements in the opposition that are doing so. Now, having said so, the prospects for a political settlement today are very dim. No one can win this war militarily. They have tried, and the opposition is not united. The Assad regime is too strong and too brutal, and is being supported by Iran and Russia. So we're in a kind of a brutal stalemate, if you will, that probably will go on for years. I'm not very optimistic of what is going on in Geneva today. I mean, Geneva supposedly should result in a transitional government with full powers that would take Syria out of this crisis and into a totally different regime. The regime, of course, has no intention of writing its own death certificate. And in the absence of, any pressure on it to do so, I'm afraid that we're going to see Syria struggle for many, many years. Syria has lost today 40% of its GDP already. In another year, Syria would have lost 60% of its GDP. If the war stops tomorrow morning, Syria will need another 10 years to achieve the Millennium Development Goals that, are very basic goals. But still, Syria has lost a generation at least of development because of this war. It's really sad. Not to mention the sectarian divide, not to mention the refugee issue, the humanitarian suffering of the Syrians. But unfortunately, I don't see a quick way out.
Thank you.
Hi, Ayman Haqqi. First of all, I've been honored to witness your meteoric rise as a star of the Arab Center, to the point where you might be the only person in the Arab Center. And secondly, I applaud you going back, because you stole my thunder by repeating that, because you are going back to Jordan, where you struggled a lot to start reforms that were like 10 years ahead of time. You could have given this lecture 10 years ago, and you could have said, if you don't do this, this would happen, and now it's happening. So I hope with all my heart that what you're saying is happening, and 10 years from now we'll be celebrating this as a prophetic moment. But because I am always a very sort of stickler on naming of books, naming your book The Second Arab Awakening as the battle for pluralism, well, if you define pluralism as ethnic and religious groups living in a society coexisting in one nation, then I would call this the battle against pluralism. Because if you use any parameters, okay, and you take every country with the exception of Tunisia, okay, in the Arab world that's happening, and if you look at the numbers between Tunisia and Egypt and all that, we're talking about 5%, 3% at the most. Then you take a snapshot today of the society, you will find that pluralism has regressed significantly. So maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but this is, in my view at least, a battle against pluralism. It is not a battle for pluralism as it is being fought today.
Okay, Ayman is a very good friend who helped me actually name my first book.
Not this one,
But
no.
obviously,
The Arab Center.
the Arab Center. Obviously, I should have consulted with him on the second one. But notice, Ayman, notice, the book is not called The Second Arab Awakening, The Battle for Pluralism. Because that then I would agree with you that this is not a battle for pluralism so far. The book is called The Second Arab Awakening and the Battle for Pluralism. Making the point.
You juxtapose this.
Making the point that to make it a battle for pluralism, certain things need to be in place. And that is why the book is divided into two parts. The first part is called Understanding the Awakening. Why did the awakening happen? And then the second part says, moving from awakening to pluralism. So if we want this not just to stop at an awakening, مش وقفة عز بس يعني. If we want this to go beyond this, then there are certain things one needs to do, including on such issues as education and others, that I talk about in my book. You mentioned Tunisia as the only example. Let's say it is the only example. Actually, I don't think it's the only example. Morocco is also doing well. But let's say Tunisia is the only example. In 3 short years, it's a phenomenal example. To move in 3 short years from a region that has not known a culture of democracy to the Islamists accepting the right of people to no belief in 3 short years, to accepting full rights for women, full rights, including on inheritance, including on issues that mainstream Islam was sometimes problematic with. I mean, it's not a bad start. It's not a bad start. You cannot expect half the Arab world to be prosperous today. And in the end, you cannot expect all of the Arab world to make it. Some people will struggle. I think countries like, unfortunately, Syria will probably take 50 years. But there are people who will set examples, good examples, and I think the Tunisians are, that can serve as models for the rest of the region.
Yeah, and they started it, so they might end
Of
it.
course. But once again, Tunisians in the past, let's say women in Tunisia, right, had lots of, actually more rights, legal rights, than any other country in the Arab world. But those rights were obtained by the sword, right? They were not obtained by a consensus in society. Bourguiba in Tunis decided he wanted this, so it was done. And for that reason, a lot of secular people in Tunisia were willing to look the other way of the Tunisian system's abuses of human rights because he gave women the right. In Syria, right, a lot of Christians are willing to look the other way as Assad butchers a lot of people because they're worried about the Islamists coming to power. I mean, if you make yourself a minority, you become a minority. If you think of yourself as a minority, not a citizen, you become a minority. And the book argues that from now on, guys, the times when your lifestyles were guaranteed by dictators, in return for you looking the other way is over. The dictators are over, and if you want the replacements to be good people, you guys have to roll up your sleeves. No one is going to give you these rights on a silver plate anymore.
We're going to take everyone who's in line for a question, and we'll close out the questions with that. So please be brief, because we want to have time to have conversation, and there's another event coming, and you'll be brief too.
Yes.
So what enabled Tunisia to make that progress in 3 short years, and is it replicable? Can it be spread?
It's a homogeneous society. It's a it's well educated. It has a history of secularism that is beyond what most of the Arab countries had. It has a history of a moderate Islamist group. Al-Nahda in Tunisia, the Islamist force in Tunisia, has more forward-looking positions, politically as well as religiously, than probably any other Islamist force in the Arab world. So it's a small country. It's manageable. A lot of factors. But that's how things start. They start usually with small countries. Everybody thought Egypt is going to be the model, and what happens in Egypt will not stay in Egypt. But Egypt is not in a good place right now and cannot serve as a model. It is behaving in an extremely exclusionist fashion, and they will continue to do that, I think, for a few more iterations before they realize that they cannot build, a stable society without inclusion.
Thank you.
Please.
Yes, one variable that was not present at the First Awakening that has been central to the Second Awakening has been the Internet.
Right.
And we've seen the power of the use of social media, one element of the Internet, in mobilization of the street. And we also see the governments, or as you're calling them, the status quo, even the newer governments, trying to get greater control over the Internet at the national and the global levels. What role do you see the Internet playing, good or bad, going forward?
No, good, and this will be increasing. I mean, I think we probably overstated the role of the Internet in the Egyptian revolution. I mean, the Internet penetration in Egypt is 20%, 80% do not have access to it. But still, with that, the youth certainly use the Internet to mobilize, so it is playing an important role. It is also playing an important role in that people no longer have to take what they are taught as gospel. Okay, they can look for themselves. They can search the web and see other points of view, and that is increasingly happening. And internet penetration also in the Arab world is rising at a dramatic pace. So yes, it is playing a good role that can only become better. It's probably not yet at where it will create a critical mass, if you will, but it can only get better.
Yes, sir.
I would think that some of your insightful remarks also apply to Turkey and to Iran, even though they're not actually Arab countries. And I was wondering if you would elaborate on that.
The Turks, much has been said about the Turkish model, right? And the Turks themselves promoted this model very actively after the Arab uprisings, and stated that Arabs, will do well if they look at this model. But in actual terms, the situation is more nuanced than this. Remember that the Arabs for a long time viewed Turkey in a hostile manner. Ataturk changed the alphabet. He severed his ties with the Mashriq, with the Orient, and looked towards Europe. He had total separation of church and state, etc. These were all things that were not. He was a friend of Israel, the only probably at the time, or among very few Islamic states that were friends with Israel. So from an Arab perspective, the Turks were not viewed in good standing. And the fact that Erdogan today is very popular, or until recently is very popular in the Arab world, had nothing to do with the Turkish model. It had everything to do with his rhetoric against Israel, which made him popular in the Arab world. It is not because of the Turkish model. But the Turkish model itself is now, undergoing severe strains. The Turks presented themselves, particularly with the Erdogan government, as the government that will rebuild relations with the Arab world. And indeed they did. And relations became much better. But of course they also presented themselves as the country that will have zero problems with the neighbors. Well, today hardly any neighbor of Turkey does not have a problem with it. Erdogan is behaving increasingly in a dictatorial manner. I think anybody who is in office for more than 2 terms, gets this plague. So he's no different. He's no different. So it's still very premature to talk about what elements of the Turkish model can be imported in the Arab world as we go along this process of evolution. Iran, again, not an Arab country. It has a moderate leadership with Rouhani, but of course Iran has a dual system of government, so Rouhani does not call all the shots, as you know. I still think that both Iran and the United States are interested seriously in a political agreement. No one wants to, I don't think the president wants to go to war. And therefore, I think that whereas both will face severe hurdles before they come to an agreement, I think the odds for an agreement are better than the odds against it. In the end, Iran as a model for governance has failed. Iran presented itself as the on the side of the oppressed after what they did with Syria and their support for Assad. Most Arabs don't see Iran as on the side of the oppressed.
Yes.
Eleanor Backrack. 2 quick questions. One is, well...
I know you're going to use semicolons, but you've got to move it along.
Well, will your book be available in Arabic and widely distributed?
Yes, that's my main aim, frankly. It's very nice to have you guys, but... So yes, it will be translated and published in Arabic.
And sorry, but do you think the Tunisian constitution might constitute a model eventually for?
I do. Not necessarily that people will just take it as it is, but in the lessons that it is sending, particularly as I said, that an Islamist force can accept peaceful rotation of power, can accept the right to no belief, can accept things, and the secular elements as well, can accept working with the Islamists, can accept consensus building, coalition governments, etc. All of these are really, they may sound basic to you, right? Maybe not in today's Washington, but they're not in the Arab world. They're not. And these are the kind of, at least, signals that Tunisia will send, even if people might not take their constitution as is and, import it to other countries.
Thank you. Last question.
Hi, my name is Ben Charpentier. I hope this isn't too much of a digression. I'll try and keep it quick. Recently, I've been researching and reading about the trial of Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid in Egypt, and kind of he was a prominent voice for religious pluralism and humanism. And obviously it happened several decades ago, and the situation in Egypt might be different, but I don't know if if in the more religiously conservative cultures, or or even in Al-Azhar, if there are any movements or people who are prominent voices for that kind of pluralism.
Well, again, Tunisian constitution. The Tunisian constitution states explicitly that no one can call, people, what's the word, apostles or You cannot do that. You cannot do that. This is not legal anymore. Culturally, of course, it's going to take a long time. I mean, people have a certain interpretation of religion, which is going to take a long time before it opens up to, I think, a more flexible one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I going to sign the book?